Welcome to Movano Health's investor webinar, B2B, the next wearables boom. In the next 30 minutes, we'll be discussing a few key topics, like what does the evolution of the wearables market look like over the last 2 decades, and why are we at a pivotal point today for good medical enterprise applications? Or number 2, what are the use cases? We'll talk specifically about 2 of them, remote patient monitoring and pharma/clinical studies. We'll explore how wearable devices can add value to these settings and which types of potential enterprise customers may be motivated to adopt this technology. And finally, we'll look at Movano Health's product, specifically the EV Ring, and how it may be deployed into these settings, and how a potential FDA clearance may pave the way for the commercial ramp across these different enterprise markets. So with that, let's jump into the event. I'm here with an esteemed panel of experts who offer a blend of vantage points from across the healthcare industry, like Dr. Rodriguez from the patient care and research point of view, John Mastrototaro, CEO of Movano Health, who has been in medical device development for 4 decades, and Michael Soul, COO of Movano Health, who has decades of experience in business development in the enterprise healthcare space. I'd like to take a quick moment for each of you to introduce yourselves and your background, how it relates to our topic today, after which we'll jump into our first topic of the discussion. Dr. Rodriguez, let's start with you.
Thanks so much. So I'm a clinical cardiologist, and cardiology is a field that really embraces technology. I also lead our section on preventive cardiology, so a lot of focus on the behaviors that we can change to improve cardiovascular health. And then I run a research group that focuses on addressing gaps in cardiovascular care prevention through digital health solutions.
Thank you. John?
Yeah, thank you. I've been in the medical device space, as you said, for many, many years, and a lot of it was spent in the area of type 1 diabetes, developing wearable devices for people living with that condition, insulin pumps and continuous glucose monitoring devices, which are relevant to what we're talking about here today. So excited to be sharing some of where we're going with our new products.
Thank you. Michael?
Yes, thanks, Matt. I've been in the wearable healthcare enterprise fields for over 20 plus years. I was with one of the first wearable companies to come out. I've seen a lot of change across the industry, and I'm just excited to be here to talk about this today.
Perfect. Thank you all. So let's jump right in. We're going to be spending a lot of time on B2B medical wearables, but of course the field has really been pushed forward by consumer wearables. And so, John, if you'd like to walk us through how this has evolved, this space, before we start talking about the future direction.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. Wearables have been around for over 20 years, and they started as step counters, activity monitors, and sleep systems. But in the most recent history, over the last several years, they started to gravitate more into healthcare. You now have heart rate monitoring, SpO2, respiration rate, etc. And although these systems are still wellness devices, not for medical purposes, they are providing some medical type information. And you can see that this market has grown dramatically, I think, through the course of COVID and other things that have happened in recent history. People are much more attuned to their health than ever before. So this market is upwards of 140 billion per year plus, and really exciting growth.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we all probably own one or multiple devices, and we obviously see the direction exploding along the lines of the medical applications, at least the promise of it. Michael, would you like to walk through what the enterprise categories look like in those market sizes?
Yeah, sure. I mean, as you can see from this slide, we've just identified just a few verticals here, but the TAM and the open market for us is unique because with our FDA clearance, it unlocks a number of these verticals that others cannot play in. So you see how corporate wellness continues to grow year over year. On the right-hand side, which are FDA specific verticals, you see condition management like cardiovascular disease, metabolic disease, obesity, pulmonary conditions, all available to us with our FDA clearance, our impending FDA clearance. And then, of course, pharma and clinical trials. These are just a snapshot. The 2 billion TAM you see here is just a snapshot of relevant clinical trials where our ring can have the immediate effect. If you go to the next slide, we've taken that kind of TAM and boiled it down to 5 focused areas. pharmaceutical in the clinical trial area, RPM, which is exploding since COVID came about, and the ability to monitor patients remotely and less costly is growing very, very fast. Payers, of course, we talked about condition management. Payers are on the front line of that condition management. And of course, you have medical device companies and self-insured employers.
Great. So a lot of big categories. Dr. Rodriguez, you're in the field. You're working with patients a lot. And Michael even brought up cardiovascular applications. What are you seeing in the field? Where are wearables being adopted? Where are they not? Where should they be? Would love your perspective.
Great. And I really do have to give John a lot of credit for his early work with the continuous glucose monitors. I think that's an example of success really in wearables, of a condition that now can be managed much simpler than it was many years ago. And we actually now see a lot of type 2 diabetics using continuous glucose monitors, and that changes behavior. They have feedback. They can dose medications more appropriately. So clearly that's a success, a lot of innovation in that field. However, there's a lot of room to use these tools in my field in cardiology. Again, commonly we use it to detect arrhythmias and heart rate abnormalities like atrial fibrillation. And again, that's a common reason I may see patients in clinic. Their wearable device notified them of an abnormality, and they come to me and say, hey, can you verify that? There's a lot of opportunities around behavior change and disease management. So I'm really excited about the promise for activity monitoring for our patients outside of the healthcare system, because again, we know that 99% of the time they're not seeing us in clinic, and we want to know what their vitals are doing, what their heart rate is doing, what their activity is doing when they're not seeing us directly.
Great. Thank you. So maybe we can shift into that first use case. So Michael, as you brought up, a number of different use cases across healthcare, but if we focus on the first one, remote patient monitoring, I think Dr. Rodriguez, you just brought up a lot of areas where it would add value to have that real-time connection with patients, have data continuously to the provider. It seems like an obvious concept. It seems like a lot of roads have been leading here, but probably came with a lot of technical challenges, and many have probably tried and clearly haven't gotten there yet. John, would you like to walk through the evolution of EV Ring and what it took technically to get the device in the shape that it's in?
Well, ironically, you said shape that it's in, and shape is a very important element of the EV Ring. Look, if you want to be able to track someone continuously over time and monitor their health that way, then you need to have a wearable that they're going to wear all the time. And so what's really important is the aesthetics, the comfort of wearing it, the ease of use in terms of how frequently you need to charge it. All of those are important factors, because ideally you want to have it on the person's finger all the time so that we can track their measures continuously and longitudinally, so we can identify when things may get out of whack and when it's important to intervene. So that's number one. Secondly, having the ability to share the data appropriately with a third party who needs it. So to share it with Dr. Rodriguez when she needs that data, and do it in a way that's accessible to her, is really important. And distilling down the wealth of data into the most salient points that are important for her for making her decisions about therapy for an individual are also critical. So all of those factors are important. And then, of course, security, cybersecurity, very important in today's world. Really important to have the protection of the data and assuring that you have all the appropriate controls in place for that.
I'll just comment, John, because of what you just said. I think one thing that's very important for a solution to be used in the healthcare system is that it's integrated with the health system platform, whatever that is. Again, you don't want a physician that's busy to have to open a separate platform to get that data. So you want that data synthesized in a way that's actionable. And then again, that can be, a click in the EHR system as opposed to open a separate app.
Yeah, and that's really why we've had a series of beta tests over the last year and a half, a first session and a second session, and we just finished our second session with one of the largest RPM companies in the country. And the reason why they wanted to beta test with us is because there's a real unique need today for medical device, FDA-approved medical devices within that care continuum. So our ring, when we get our FDA approval, will fit an unmet need today. And so they beta tested a very successful beta test. One of the other reasons within RPM is the ability for us to fit into coding, so reimbursable coding. Today, there are codes like 99452 and 99453, which are reimbursable codes that a provider or a healthcare system can use. And within that coding, it clearly states that all the components within that RPM solution need to be FDA approved devices. So that means today you can't pull a wellness device off the shelf. We all know a few of those. We may even have a few of those. Those unfortunately cannot fit within that reimbursable RPM solution. So RPM is growing very, very fast since COVID. The ability to monitor people, as John had said, remotely, and the doctor has said longitudinally, puts us in a unique position with our solution.
Yeah, that's a great point, Michael. So it sounds like from the corporates, the FDA clearance is important. Dr. Rodriguez, on your side of things, as a provider, do you share that same need to know that there's an FDA benchmark that's being cleared?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, there's so many products in the market. I think I was sharing with one of my patients, there's actually toilet seat blood pressure monitors that somebody can use. And I was like, don't get that, because again, it hasn't met the bar of FDA clearance, which I think is a very fair bar. The other thing that's technical and important is that you want whatever the product to be calibrated and validated against a gold standard. And that's the first question I ask anybody that brings me a product, what was your gold standard? And I think people don't really think about that when they're offering it directly to consumers, and the FDA bar, of course, has that. So yes, I think it's very important. HIPAA compliance. And again, I think what John said can be understated, that you need the patients to wear it. You need the patients to be engaged, to have long-term compliance, because everybody likes new, shiny things. But if they don't fit into the lifestyle, both for the patient and the clinician, they're not going to be used long-term.
Yeah, that's great. And John, Michael, do we have a cameo for Evie, or do you guys? All right, there we go. So
it's very comfortable, by the way.
All right. So to that point, so you share that as well, Dr. Rodriguez, that it's important that folks want to wear it. There's not going to be an interruption in terms of that data feed, and it'll be easily adoptable. On the gold standard. So John, at this point now, Evie Ring has been through clinical studies. You've studied it extensively. You've measured it against these benchmarks that Dr. Rodriguez is talking about. And I think we have a slide that has a couple of different data panels from prior studies. If you'd like to walk through that clinical journey of ensuring that the data quality matches the standard that Dr. Rodriguez and other providers would require.
Yeah, the first two metrics we're seeking FDA clearance for are heart rate and SpO2. And the SpO2 trials are really challenging for the volunteers who accept to be in the studies, because the FDA wants us to verify two things. Number one, with these optical sensors, is that because it's an optical based approach, is the data accurate for people of all skin tones, of all ethnicities, et cetera? We have to make sure it works for all. The second is we have to make sure that it's accurate across a very broad range of oxygen levels, for example. And so in the clinical trials that are done, it goes from 70% oxygen up to the normal 95 to 100%. 70% oxygen is really low. And the volunteers in the study go through a lot breathing in gas mixtures to get them down to 70. And we, as Dr. Rodriguez said, what's the gold standard? Well, in these studies, the hospitals use a gold standard of arterial blood gas measurements. So we're comparing the data from our ring to arterial blood gas. And in the studies, we achieved a level of accuracy that was well within the FDA guidance, but better than the hospital grade pulse oximeters that are there today, which had some accuracy related issues in people of color, which became very evident through the course of COVID, when it was found that often those devices would overread the true oxygen level. And we think that it's because they use an approach where they shine the light all the way through a finger. We use a reflected mode with the ring, and we see no change in performance across skin tone. So really important outcome. This data has now been published, and we're very excited about its utility out with consumers. Anyone using the product, it can work for them very well.
That's really helpful. John, thank you. Maybe you can walk us through the analytes that have been studied that are on that product roadmap, and maybe we can spend a moment talking about the actual clinical use from Dr. Rodriguez's perspective. For instance, blood pressure other ones that you think would be relevant? I know there's a lot of things Evie can track.
We're obviously heart rate is part of what we've got in now. We are also looking at respiration rate, certain sleep related metrics that could tell us whether someone has sleep disturbances, like sleep apnea is very important for what we're doing. And then of course we have our own proprietary technology. This is a radio frequency based approach where we can monitor blood pressure without a cuff and potentially glucose non-invasively. We recently completed a blood pressure clinical study at the end of last year where we saw accuracy that was within the FDA guidance for accuracy when compared to a typical hospital cuffed approach for blood pressure. So some really exciting new analytes coming in the future beyond the initial two.
Yeah, thanks, John. And I think for me as a cardiologist, all those analytes are extremely relevant and useful. But if I had to pick one unmet need in the market that is really critical, it really is blood pressure monitoring, and doing so in a cuffless way that captures longitudinal data. Because again, we know that every time a patient comes to clinic, their blood pressure is high. They're like, it's not really like that when I leave the office. And there's just a missed opportunity to manage the blood pressure with a combination of lifestyle and medications. And I think that could really make a big change in our population health. And that is a solution that we're all looking for. Now, of course, there's anything that can be done non-invasively and can provide feedback to our patients is very useful. And we know that changes behavior. Having things like weight, again, heart rate when they exercise, heart rate variability, recovery, all those things are extremely useful as we encourage exercise in our patients.
So Dr. Rodriguez, when it comes to actual benefit and clinical benefit that does affect patients and that healthcare providers are happier, can you just walk us through what that looks like? So you get a data feed, you understand what's happening with your patient, day to day versus every 6 months, and then you can modify the treatment course. Can you just walk us through how having that data actually translates to better outcomes?
Absolutely. And I think the big issue is that in a U.S. healthcare, right, we have these episodic intermittent visits. Not everybody's seeing a cardiology specialist like myself. And in reality, most blood pressure is being managed in the primary care settings. And we know a lot of people don't even have access to significant primary care close to home. So as you have that data, it's really one point in time, but you know that blood pressure, like many other risk factors, are additive. So you think about it just like smoking. It's really pack years of exposure to high blood pressure. And we have really good treatments to reduce blood pressure. Again, combination of lifestyle and medications. We have many, many generic medications that can help individuals. But again, we're getting that data too late. And high blood pressure, people don't have symptoms, right? So without that data, they may not even know. So there's some recent report from the U.S. surgeon that half of U.S. adults have high blood pressure. Many don't know of it. And those that know of it, less than a quarter are well controlled. So again, huge opportunity. So if I was seeing a patient with a cuffless blood pressure, they're sending me data, you could imagine this could almost be algorithmic, right? And again, you can elevate the complex cases to a physician, but in reality, a lot of this could be titrating medications, reacting very quickly to feedback instead of waiting months, years to really do something.
Yeah, that's really helpful. So the bottleneck right now in better outcomes isn't necessarily we need new therapeutics, we need new interventions. It's we just need the data. We need a better system to manage what we're seeing from patients and then change course and actually apply what's already available.
And again, not requiring individuals to have to come into a doctor's office, during business hours to get their blood pressure checked. And most of the time they're going to say it's high because I was stressed trying to find parking to come see you. So again, getting the blood pressure in real time. And again, a lot of opportunities related to blood pressure. I think the sleep management, the American Heart Association has recently added sleep as one of the essential 8 heart factors that really promote wellness and health. So even measuring that oftentimes relates to high blood pressure is really important.
That's great. Thank you. And John, I'm guessing Evie also measures sleep.
It does. Yeah, our goal is to measure all of the key metrics that are important to one's health. So naturally, we've got the heart rate variability, as was mentioned, respiration rate, temperature changes, sleep and the sleep stages, activity levels, calories burned, and even logging capability for mental wellness, which is obviously another pillar in my eyes of health. I think of what you put in your body to eat, how well you're sleeping, your activity levels, and your mental wellness. Are you in a good place as it relates to stress? We're trying to look at all of those things to get that more comprehensive look at a person's health.
That's helpful. Thank you. And Dr. Rodriguez, I think your comments underscore the idea that there's a lot of value in the healthcare system to be had just in having that type of data solution. We had a data panel in one of the slides showing that enterprise spend on healthcare data solutions is expected to exceed 100 billion in the coming decade. Michael, you're dealing with end customers, B2B customers on behalf of Movano. Is that the type of demand you're seeing? When you see numbers like 100 billion of market size for healthcare data solutions, does that surprise you? What kind of demand are you seeing on your side dealing with potential customers, B2B?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible, and those numbers are accurate, if even perhaps a little conservative. The idea that we need new tools or different tools that don't exist today. There are tools available, and tools like the EV Ring, which will be FDA approved, will really help solve for that. So I'm engaged with a number of pharmaceutical companies, medical device companies, and a large payer as well, who I've identified our solution as having the ability to help them reverse the cost curve, right? And so they see all of this money being spent at the end of that continuum. Let's get ahead of it, and tools like ours help them do that.
That's great. Thank you. And I think even in the recent financing, you identified a strategic that came in. So it sounds like, these strategic players are already, vouching for the company in the way of investment. And
Sure.
Clearly you see a pipeline of activity ahead. Why don't we shift to the next use case? So we spent some time on remote patient monitoring, but on the clinical side of things, Dr. Rodriguez, in addition to seeing patients as a practitioner, you're a researcher. And so would love to hear your point of view on where better data, continuous data with clinical trial participants would add value to your research.
Absolutely. I think that is a positive lesson of the pandemic, that we don't need to have individuals, so participants from clinical trials, come to the office to collect data that should be readily available, probably more accurate if collected in the home environment. So there's a huge opportunity. Every clinical trial in the cardiovascular space collects detailed, deep biometric data. And again, having a solution that's outside of the healthcare system will be a great opportunity to reduce costs, but even more importantly, or equally important, is to reduce the burden on the participants. That prevents them from completing the trial. It also prevents diverse populations from enrolling in the trials, because we know that for some individuals, it's very hard to make these in-person inconvenient visits. And again, the huge digital divide is not necessarily true for clinical trials, where you can actually provide the device as part of the clinical trial and could actually entice people to come and join the trial because they're getting a tool. But I will say it will require some additional training at the role of the investigators and people enrolling the participants to make sure that additional resources are provided to make sure everybody is trained on how to use whatever the device is. But a huge opportunity. And again, I think that this is where our field is heading, because the cost of clinical trials right now is too high for commonly collected data.
That's right.
And
that engagement, initial engagement, just to follow on to Dr. Rodriguez, the initial engagement that we've had already, I mentioned that we've run some strategic beta tests. We've had a Fortune 150 pharmaceutical company be a participant in our beta test for that specific reason, the reasons the doctor mentioned. And they see our tool, an FDA-approved, highly wearable ring format, as helping them expedite the process to get approval for their drugs. And not only just that is just a near-term opportunity for us to fit in that's unmet today. But also there's this movement of large pharmaceutical companies to move beyond just behind the prescription and engaging with their end users and their customers. And so you're starting to see this post-market surveillance of people on a certain molecular drug, monitoring their overall health. Our ring does that. And also you're starting to see movement of large pharmaceutical companies creating consumer bundles that can be offered along with a prescription and a device, solving for many use cases. So we're actively engaged with that today.
I think that's a great point, because sometimes you need to bundle things. We know that health behaviors come together, even though you have a specific molecule for one part of the pathway. Mm-hmm. It's all linked, and a more engaged patient, customer is more engaged with the treatment overall. So I think tying in when we talked about mental health, treats, right, that people take your medication and this, right? It's all aligned together, so it creates incentives both ways.
That's helpful. And in bringing back a theme from the remote patient monitoring segment, does the FDA clearance carry the same weight? So Dr. Rodriguez, for you, is that important? Michael, when you speak to potential enterprise customers of Movano, is that still important even in this setting?
I mean, absolutely, especially for a clinical trial where you want to ensure that protocols are very clearly focused, and to have data that's not correct and really affect your outcome, it's critical. And then you also want the result of the trial to be generalizable to other populations. So you want something that's going to be around and vouched for and validated and improved after the trial is completed.
Right, and the wearability and form factor of our device today, tools that are used in clinical trials are clunky, big, cumbersome. People don't like to wear them. We've solved for that with the EV ring, and that's why we're highly engaged with pharmaceutical companies.
And Michael, the pharma companies also see the FDA clearance as an important, piece of validation, as they consider deploying the device into their studies.
Absolutely, it just with an FDA approval, it automatically you have a stamp of approval on the accuracy, and it helps expedite that whole approval process. That's very important to them.
That's great. Well, I know that Movano Health had a recent press release on a clinical study collaboration with researchers at MIT. John, would love your perspective on what this means as kind of a foray into using EV in clinical studies.
Yeah, sure. So this is a clinical trial that's designed to look at what's happening with people who have both acute Lyme disease and chronic Lyme, as well as long COVID, and some otherwise healthy volunteers as part of the study, tracking all the parameters from the EV ring over time and looking for signals for when people have certain flare-ups with the chronic Lyme, or certain different symptoms that come up with long COVID. The main leader of this trial, Dr. Tal, echoed what Dr. Rodriguez said earlier about why a device like this that could track the data longitudinally, and all the data that collects longitudinally, is so useful. And the group at MIT believe that by using the EV ring and collecting these multitude of metrics over time, they can start to find signals of why certain people develop certain conditions when they're living with chronic Lyme or long COVID. So it's going to be a very insightful and exciting study, and new things I'm sure are going to come from it.
That's great. Thank you. So maybe we can, I know we're nearing the end here, but to shift into what the future holds for Movano Health with EV specifically, deploying the ring. It's already been deployed into the consumer setting. So now thinking about ramping up efforts in the enterprise domain, as we've been discussing today, we know that the ring has long been in a FDA review process. And so, John, if you can give us an update and sense of where that process stands today.
Sure. So the ring is in at the FDA right now for the heart rate and SpO2 functions, as I mentioned earlier. It was filed in April with the agency, and we are right now in the process of working with the FDA through the filing, hopefully getting to the point where we can have the device cleared within the next several months. So it's been a very collaborative situation with the agency, which is always good. And a product like this is going under a lot more review than historically it was, because of some of the challenges with pulse oximeters through the course of COVID. But because we've gotten such great clinical evidence with the trials that were run independently from the organization, I think it bodes well for us with getting the clearance. And the opportunity is there's just no shortage of opportunities. I mean, when I think about the different conditions that exist related to health, because of the standard metrics we're monitoring, there's not a shortage of utility in almost any condition that you can think of to use a product like this. And certainly Michael can tell you about the conversations he's had with all the entities in healthcare who see a real need for something.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. There is no shortage. The main goal for us is to focus on which ones we want to do. But from a near term, like when I think of segmenting what our opportunities are, it's near term and long term. I think that near term opportunities are, as we talked about, clinical trials. I mean, as soon as FDA approval happens, we can become part of multiple thousands of clinical trials that are happening across the country every day. So that's an opportunity for us. And then that's the RPM side of the business that we talk, part of a reimbursable solution that is currently not met with wellness wearables on the market today. So that's near-term stuff that happens, within weeks of our FDA approval. The longer-term ones, as folks who will be listening to this webinar know, are the payers, right? So we had a very large payer in a strategic beta with us. They're addressing all those chronic conditions that we saw on an earlier slide. So that takes a little bit more time, but we are engaged with them now in anticipation of our FDA approval. And then, of course, we talked about other pharma consumer bundles and trialing and things like that. That takes time as well, but we're engaged with two very, very large, quickly identifiable pharma companies today in anticipation of that as well. So I think of things in short term and long term, and we are blessed to have lots of opportunity in both of those buckets.
That's great. Well, thank you all very much. We're near the end of our time. Based on that FDA timing slide, it looks like summer is a pretty important time for Movano Health. And so probably a good time for folks to keep their eye very closely on the company. And it looks like, Michael, you've been developing plans when it comes to the commercial aspect of things, that there are a lot of things, well teed up, and with a lot of practitioners on the other end waiting for good solutions to deploy into their practices, like many of Dr. Rodriguez's comments. So thank you all very much. Dr. Rodriguez, John, Michael, thank you very much for your time and participating today. And to all of the attendees that took their time to hear the webinar, a recording will be made available, and we look forward to fielding any additional questions afterwards. We'll be very responsive to that. Thank you all very much for your time and for your participation today.
Thank you.
Thank you.